Hello. Okay, I'm going to introduce you and we'll get going.
All right, thank you.
Y'all, let's have fun here. Hello, everyone. Before I introduce our esteemed moderator, I want to take a moment to express my gratitude to our Dean, Dr. Cheryl Kennedy Heidel, for conceptualizing the exhibition currently on display at the DeBaugh Design Center on the 4th floor of Monroe Library. Dr. Heidel envisioned this exhibition as a celebration of Harold Baquet and the black and brown photographers of New Orleans, and here we are today. The show has been up since October, and tonight's event serves as a wonderful addition to the exhibition. I am truly honored to be part of this exhibition and the events surrounding it. Having worked here for 24 years, I had the privilege of knowing Harold Baquet. I know he would be overjoyed to see this collaboration where we are celebrating the photographers, Loyola, New Orleans, and the black and brown communities. As I was preparing the slideshow for tonight's panel discussion, I noticed the incredible synergy between all the photographers featured. This slideshow shares some of Harold's creative work, including his photos from Loyola, as well as images from those on the panel. I am thankful for Kasimu Harris for curating the tribute to Harold Baquet, picturing Blackness, and for moderating this panel discussion. Kasimu Harris is a New Orleans-based artist whose work centers on telling the stories of underrepresented communities in New Orleans and beyond through photography, writing, and various conceptual devices. His work has been featured in numerous exhibitions, including solo shows at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center and the Hillard Art Museum, and group exhibitions such as State of the Art 2020 at Crystal Bridges Museum. His Vanishing Black Bars and Lounges series will debut in Prospect 6, or has debuted in Prospect 6, and he has also contributed to publications like the New York Times and Edible New Orleans. Please help me welcome Kasimu Harris.
Thank y'all. Thanks everyone here and online. Thanks to this wonderful group of panelists. So I'll get into the curatorial statement about Harold Baquet, which would help situate this talk, and then I'll introduce the panelists. Harold Baquet was the epitome of an unwavering visual documenter of New Orleans, its people, and its abundance of cultural riches. Baquet, 1958 to 2015, was a native son of the city, whose roots in the city extended 7 generations. Baquet's love for image making is evident through his contributions to mayoral administrations of Ernest Dutch Morial and Sidney Bartholomew, and then 25 years as Loyola University's photography. This exhibition is a meditation into Baquet's iconic photographs that he made around New Orleans while he was not on assignment. Baquet, much like Arthur P. Baidu, who was one of his greatest photography inspirations, had unparalleled access to people. It was that passage that allowed him to backstage to document Miles Davis in conversation with Wynton Marsalis in 1985. It gained him entry into a barbershop where a gray beard is trimming the hair of a young boy. And it is that spirit of intergenerational relationships where this exhibition is situated. The 10 photographers were tasked to present work that pushed visual boundaries and was in dialogue with Baquet's depictions of New Orleans. The curation was driven by seeing what was never seen before and seeing what we have seen differently. So, I start to my left. Gerard Mouton III is a native of New Orleans and a graduate of Rochester Institute of Technology with a BS degree in photographic process management. He has been photographing since 1964. He has photographed the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival since 1987, save for 4 years, and was a key contributor to the exhibition and book, Seeing Black. Ashley Lorraine is a photographer and a graphic designer who seamlessly merges her background in art and communications to create compelling visual narratives. With a keen eye for capturing the raw emotional essence of her subjects and the immediacy of the moment, she imbues her photography with a profound sense of connection. From thought-provoking projects like Black Men in America to documenting the vibrant energies of New Orleans, her portfolio reflects the authenticity and soul of the city. Edward Buckles Jr. is a son of New Orleans. His nonlinear path to filmmaking has birthed a brand of visual storytelling, an aesthetically beautiful marriage between fine art and guerrilla-style documentation. Buckles' work calls his audience towards remembrance and to see the beauty in imperfections. The award-winning filmmaker, director, and producer continues to find inspiration in his people and innovative ways to share stories of the Black communities that would otherwise be lost in the passage of time. His film Katrina Babies was shortlisted for a 2023 Academy Award. His production company, House of the Young Entertainment, is a beacon of the New Orleans arts and a platform of culture in the city. His debut HBO documentary, Katrina Babies, a co-production by Time Studios, House of the Young, and Creative Control TV, was released in 2022. He was featured in Doc NYC's 40 Under 40 in 22 and was awarded the New Orleans for Film Society's Rising Star Award. So now we set the stage of who we are, and I'm going to start with Brother Mouton, who personally knew Brother Harold Baquet. Some of his work is on the screen now. I see flambeaus. You got it.
Okay, yeah, the flambeau carriers, I was there witness Harold taking the pictures. Now, Harold was an electrician by trade, and there was this magazine at the time period called Peterson's Photographic, and there were several times, articles in there on how to do and how to make things. In one of the articles during that time period when photographic magazines were pretty popular was a story on how to make a remote trigger for a flash. So Harold made one of those, and he had his cousin hold the remote trigger on a pole, and that's how he was able to light the flambeau carriers at the time. So as I said, I witnessed Harold taking that picture. But Harold's from the same part of town that I'm from, the 7th Ward. His mother's house was on Miro Street, just where Miro makes that, like a Y, a cut to St. Bernard Avenue, and a cut straight up. Right there was his mother's house. And right there on AP Turo was the barber shop where he took the picture of his nephew getting his hair cut by Wendell Pepin. And Pepin was Harold's barber. Pepin was my barber, my childhood barber also. But Pepin's first shop that I knew of was across the street from Valina C. Jones School, where I went to school on Miro Street. So that picture related to Harold in many ways, and I think that's, for me, that's my favorite photograph that Harold Baquet ever took. Now, Harold was taught photography, according to his wife Sharon, by a guy named Naja. I remember Naja. I haven't seen him in decades, but I remember seeing him on the street. He had dreadlocks, and this was before digital, and he would have one little camera and maybe a light meter in his hand or another lens in his hand, and he would take pictures. The last time I ever sighted this brother was around St. Louis Cemetery. I think it was a protest or something like that. But that's where Harold was taught photography by this guy named Naja. Harold also, according to his biography, he was a shoemaker by trade. That was one of his first jobs as a shoemaker. And his, when he was, before he really fully got into photography, his roommate was Merlin Summers. Now, they lived on, they shared an apartment on the corner of St. Peter and Royal Street. So you had the A&P store, which is Rouse's now, on the diagonal from that building where they stayed in. And at one time, that was the tallest building in the city of New Orleans. It was called the Skyscraper. So to get to their apartment on the second floor, you had to go on St. Peter Street through Johnny Donnell's gallery. Now, Johnny Donnell's was a photographer who took pictures in the French Quarter, and he was a French Quarter resident. And one of the pictures on the wall there was a picture of Eubie Blake's long fingers playing the piano. and I think that was Johnny Donnell's most famous photograph. But you had to go in there to get upstairs to where Marilyn and Harold shared an apartment. Now, according to Marilyn, he was his roommate until Harold met Sharon, so he kicked him out. So, but that's some of the part of the story on Harold. But I'll get into how he became the photographer at City Hall in later on in proceedings.
Thank you. This is the importance of telling our own stories. I've seen the picture with Pepin and his nephew numerous times, but I never saw the context behind it. And, we can't tell stories from the grave, and I'm glad this is being recorded just to, it's like I'm learning on stage right now.
Yeah, Pepin cut my father's hair, my father's brother's hair, and my father's father's hair. Pepin's wife was Mercedes Morero. Her name was pronounced Mercedes, not Mercedes, but it was the same spelling. And he lived on Old New Orleans Street, not far from there. And he would walk to work. I don't ever remember Pepin driving a car. I never see, maybe he did, but I never saw Pepin driving a car. But that's a connection right there in the 7th Ward right there on AP2. It's called London Avenue. Now, the building is still there. Now, right behind it is a small street. They fenced off the part of it that hits AP2 Road, but that's called Galvez Walk. That is the official name of that little street right there, Galvez Walk. Now, it's torn down with the Circle Theater, and the Circle Theater, on the bottom, white folks sat and black folks sat in the balcony, a segregated place. And I think that's on that spot where it was rallies, that's where the Circle Theater was. But in the barbershop, Pepin had the actual clock with a neon light around it that was in the Circle Theater. He got it before they demolished the theater. So, he was a historian himself, so to speak. If you want to know the history of the 7th Ward, Pepin had it.
Thank you. Now, I'll start with you, Ashley, or continue with you. And it's so hard, like some of these pictures I know I haven't seen, so I keep looking. Ashley, one of the hallmarks of Baquet's photography is his love for the community. And, I've seen that in your work, from your unwavering documentation to Zulus, the Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club, as well as the Social Aid and Pleasure Clubs, and then your series, Black Men America. So do you see parallels to your artistic practice to his? If so, tell me about it.
Yes, I can see some parallels in the work. From some of the work that I have seen of Harold Baquet, I could tell he was at a lot of key moments in history, and that's what I try to do as well. Like I remember that photo of at the funeral with Moriel. Yeah, like which is that photo. Whenever I go see the exhibit, I'm stuck right there at that photo because it's so like it really draws you in. Yes, it's like every.
It's the family when Dutch died.
When Dutch died.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And that photo is so many different emotions in that photo, and I'm just so happy that I can actually see that photo. But I feel like the parallels in my work is I'm basically trying to do the same thing, that later on in life I want people to be able to see what was happening in New Orleans during this time. I think it's important that we tell our own stories, what happens in the community, what happens at a second line, what happens at Super Sunday, what happens at Zulu, what Zulu was looking like during this time, what the fashion was looking like, what the people were looking like, what were we eating. And I feel like a lot of times you can see that it's almost the same thing. The fashion changed just a little bit, but I still feel like some of that same fashion is around. Yeah.
I want you to answer that too. And I've known you since you were in college, and I haven't known you to do anything else but storytelling. I think you taught for a little while, but you taught storytelling. So Yeah, so tell me about your practice related to his and your unwavering commitment to telling stories about New Orleans and beyond as well.
Yeah, first of all, thanks everybody for coming out and thanks for having me. I actually wanted to go to Loyola when I finished high school, so it's full circle to be back here. You know, it feels weird to say parallel, you know, to such an icon and like a legend. You know, I'm still trying to, you know, make my way to his level, you know. But I would say influence. You know, I think that he, you know, he influenced like a whole generation, whether they know it or not, right? Something that's very unique to New Orleans, and you know, I've lived in New York. I've done like a lot of work in LA and other places, and when I see like the young photographers and the young filmmakers, you know, most of them, not all of them, but like a lot of them get their starts in studios, right? And they practice studio photography, and they, you know, it's all about, you know, those types of setups. But here in New Orleans, you know, our studios are our neighborhoods, for the most part. You know, our playground is pretty much, you know, our second lines, and you know what's happening in our neighborhoods, our barbershops, our family reunions, you know, and you know the influence that this man played on us was tremendous because he did just that. You know, he was outside, you know, as we say today, like he was really outside, you know. And, you know, I mean, like even now it's like I've seen his work referenced and on mood boards for like things like music videos to, you know, commercials. Like it's like everybody wants to get that realness, right? And I would say that, you know, for me in my practice, you know, I just try to do one thing that he was doing for certain, even more important than making art, is preserving, right? You know, preserving us, preserving our stories. And that's really what I do it for. You know, I love to make art. I love to make things look cool and progressive and all of that. But at the end of the day, what really matters to me is just preserving our stories, and like, you know, just like preserving, and, you know, one day when we're not here no more, like, it's just like we were here, right? And piggybacking off of like what you just said, it's like when I see his work, it's like this person was here, right? Or, you know, this style was here, right? It's like these things, these actions were here. So I would say that that's how he influences me, just to, you know, want to contribute and like continue to just add to that are part of documenting us, you know?
Yeah, thank you for that. Brother Mouton, speaking of preserving and being able to boldly declare that I was here, I want to ask you about two things. I see some of your work, like some of the work that's in the exhibition of Ernie K. Doe outside of his lounge, or it's just a hand-scribbled sign of, I believe, someone selling coon, which I've had once at Kermit's. I was just bragging about I eat anything, and they was like, "Oh, we got some coon." I was like, "Oh Lord, gotta eat it now." It was good though, but so what I want to know specifically is, you, much like Harold, like you told stories about your specific community, the black community, and then you have storytelling from a larger community, be it New Orleans with the Jazz Fest. Why is it important to you to tell stories of your own community, specifically the black community?
Well, because I'm black.
Yeah.
And I don't know being anything else but black. And let me talk about that and relate to Harold. Now, Harry Lee was the sheriff of Jefferson Parish, and it was in the 80s or the 90s. And there's a lot of crime. There's always crime. Harry Lee was blaming the crime in Jefferson Parish on black folks from New Orleans. So he issued an order to arrest black people driving raggedy cars in Jefferson Parish. Harold had a little Japanese import mini truck. That's what he drove. And even at the press conference, even at Dutch's funeral, Harold didn't wear a suit. I think he had on a tie with a crumpled up shirt, because I don't think he ever had a press shirt. But he was driving his truck He needed a paint job and had dents here and there through Jefferson Parish and Old Metairie, and he was stopped. That made the 10 o'clock news because of who he was. And Harold said on the news, if I were a darker brother, who knows what would have happened? And he never shied away from his being black. Even though in his family, the Baquet family, historically, Akil Baquet, and you can find this, Akil Baquet was one of the early jazz musicians. He went to New York and he passed for white. But Harold never passed for white. He photographed himself. The city of New Orleans was his canvas. And being the photographer, and the title was photographer in the Office of Public Relations in the mayor of the city of New Orleans. So we just call him the mayor's photographer for short. That gave him access to the entire city of New Orleans. And he just didn't stay here. He ventured from New Orleans to photograph also. So that's the beautiful thing about Harold.
Thank you.
About Jazz Fest. You asked me about Jazz Fest. Okay, so Jazz Fest, the first year I started shooting it as promotions photographer. And it was only one person at that time. My immediate predecessor was Harold. Before Harold, I think he did it twice. I started in '87. Before Harold, for a long time, was Pat Jolly. Now, Pat also took our ID pictures on, it was Polaroid that they laminated, but we don't use that anymore because everything is on the barcode. So they have your identification information on the barcode. But Harold was the photographer before I was. And then before him, it was Pat Jolly. Now, it's 4 of us in that position because Jazz Fest is big now. I mean, even though they don't have the night concerts on the SS President anymore because the president is not even here in the night concerts in the municipal auditorium. You used to have night concerts at Proud's Club, Alhambra, in other places. Even though they don't have that, it's got very, very big just in that one spot. So to cover it, we have 4 people. 3 others in addition to me. Now, this is a little confusing, but I do not photograph for the foundation. The foundation has its own group of photographers. And you had asked me, you said several years ago when you first saw me out there, how could you do that? Those are volunteer photographers. So anybody interested in that comes up around October, November next year. So you can look on the website of the Jazz Fest Foundation about their volunteer photography program, and you can apply for that. That comes from what Eric Waters did. Eric Waters proposed to Wally Abdel Raouf, who was the executive director in the 90s, that he photographed the Jazz Fest for the foundation. And Eric did it by himself, then he got some other photographers. And so now they formally have an archive and an archivist who does that. And they have volunteer photographers who do that. Now the foundation's archive is separate from the foundation building on South Rampart Street. The archive is located in the French Quarter in what used to be Stoney's hardware store on Dauphine in St. Peter Street. Now, Mr. Sawney, he lived in the Tremie, and according to my mother, the Sawneys, some of them passed white, but that particular Mr. Sawney, he committed suicide during the Depression. But that's some of the history about where the archive and Harold with the jazz and Hedgefield. Now, the foundation, for the 50th anniversary of the festival, they used some of Harold's photographs in the book that the Smithsonian published.
Gotcha. Thank you. Ashley, I'll come back to you and then ask you, I want y'all both to answer the same question. When we're thinking about, like, I want you to answer the question about community. Like, why is it important for you to document the Black community?
It's important for me to document the Black community because that's where I'm at and what I'm doing all day is something Black. But I think it's when I was at Xavier University and I started in graphic design, my biggest challenge, and I talk about this a lot, was finding images of Black people on stock websites. And I think for me, it's really me capturing those images so that they can be used for something later on. Like when you're marketing things, it's important that you market to people, you market to your audience. So imagine having a flyer that's about something that's Black and you got a white person on it. For me, it should be whoever that audience is. If you talk about New Orleans, it needs to be some authentic images of New Orleans. You know, if you're talking about Black masking Indians, we need to see the authentic images of the Black masking Indians. And I think that's very important that I capture those images because I'm a part of the culture here. It's okay if other people come from outside, but I think it's important for the people that live here that we tell our own stories. And even when people come from out of town, they want to tell a story about New Orleans. Like, I think it should be through the lens of, if you want to talk about the culture in New Orleans, it should be through the lens of a Black photographer in the community that goes out every day. You said something in Harold Baquet's, in the artist statement I wrote down, and it says that you said we are not on assignment, and it's so crazy because I don't think people know that. Every week somebody asks me, well, who are you shooting for? I'm shooting for myself. I want to make sure I have I want to make sure like later on in life that we know like what's going on and what happened during that time, how was the Super Sunday in 2025? How was the first Super Sunday after COVID? How was it for that first second line that happened right after COVID? What did the images look like? What did people look like with the mask on in 1,000 degrees?
Right, and for context, assignment is when someone has assigned you a story and you're working for an organization, Reuters, Bayou Daily News, or just whatever. So most of us, all of us, like we've taken those jobs, but then it's the work you are doing just because you have an unwavering love for storytelling and you out there unassigned just for yourself.
Super Sunday just passed, and there's not a mention of Super Sunday. Right. Does anybody in here know how that parade started?
Well, I do, but I know you know more than I do.
Okay. Jerome Smith, who was a member of Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and there was a photographer by the name Marion James Porter. Porter photographed for the Louisiana Weekly after World War II. One of his iconic images was when Louis Armstrong was King Zulu in 1949, and on the front page of the Louisiana Weekly, I think it's the March 10th edition. But anyway, there's a picture Porter took of the Armstrong float on Orleans and Prayer, torn to bits. Now, my mother told me that her father, because my mother grew up in the Tremie, that when that float got downtown, people had ripped it up because they wanted a souvenir. But the picture shows the float, but you don't see Armstrong on the float. I don't even know if Armstrong was still in the parade at that time, because it was, from the photograph, it had to be with a flash, because you can see that it was dusk or dark by the time it got there, and from the lighting. But Porter was the photographer for Louisiana Weekly, and in the 60s, he photographed the civil rights movement. He had pictures of Jerome Smith carrying picket signs on Dryden Street, on Canal Street. He has those photographs. He has pictures of the core group standing by the Bienville statue when it was by the train station. And he had other pictures of the civil rights movement. So being close to Jerome Smith, and Jerome being part of that culture, Jerome said what to do about this culture, the Indians. And matter of fact, Port has photographs of the Indians back in the 60s, maybe even before that, and of the skeletons also. So that's nothing new. So Porter proposed to Jerome, you ought to start a parade. So that's how Super Sunday came about. 1969 was the very first year. I think the first parade started up at what was called Shakespeare Park, now E.L. Davis Park, and went to Huntersfield. And when it ended there, they had a stage with entertainment. That was 69. So they alternated from starting at Shakespeare and ended at Hunters, starting at Hunters, and then at Shakespeare. So it would start uptown one year, and 1 year it would start downtown. Now the parading downtown has really faded away, so to speak. So that's why you have the big thing uptown. But it was the idea of a black photographer to have that parade. Now, Jerome also told me that on St. Joseph night, which is tonight, up there in the 6th Ward, in the Tremie, they would start at the Gens Amis. Now, the Gens Amis is one of those old societies, music societies and benevolent societies. I think they still have a sign up next to Charbonnet on St. Philip Street, where the Gens Amis Hall actually was. But Jerome told me they would start at the Gens Amis and stay in that part of town. What Super Sunday does, and that's the brilliant thing, it has almost all of the gangs or tribes, and you can just stay in one position and see all of them. You can't do that on Mardi Gras. It's impossible. It's just too many. You just can't do it. So that's the beauty of it. Now, once again, that was 69, and the Jazz Fest was 1970, when the culture was put on the stage, but it was put on the stage before the Jazz Fest put it on the stage.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. It was far more than I knew. Now, so Brother Mouton has said some names that the talent deserving wider recognition, just here in this city. We talk about Beidou, Marion Porter, even to a certain extent, Harold Baquet. Now, Harold Baquet, I know when he died, the Washington Post had published his obituary, so that's a big deal. So I want to know that you're from New Orleans, you take images of New Orleans. At what point did you think that I want my work to be on a national scale for something like an HBO documentary and things like that?
It's funny. Whenever I started making Katrina babies, that's not what I was doing it for. To be honest, I started making it when I was in college, and my plan with it was to just put it on YouTube or put it in like a school's library. My goal at I think I was like 20 years old. I was like, oh, this is gonna be a great idea. I'm gonna put it on YouTube. I'm gonna reach out to every college in Louisiana and ask them if they could put this film in their libraries. And that's still my plan. We still never did it yet, but that's still my plan. But it was never my plan to I guess try to reach the masses with it, because I was just so busy in the field trying to tell the story. During my process, I kept getting people asking me these very weird questions that people still ask to this day. Okay, why is this story going to matter to a kid in Canada? Why is this story going to matter to a kid in New York? Why is this story going to matter to somebody in these different places? And it's funny now because almost 20 years later, I think that we can count a bunch of reasons why Hurricane Katrina matters, to the rest of the world. But at the time, I was just worried about making a project that meant something to New Orleans and that could, take back the narrative. Earlier, you had proposed the question, why do we make work about and regarding Black people? And I just think that there's this element of just wanting to control and own our narratives. For me, growing up, I watched like a lot of work and seen, you know, like a lot of work that was made about us, but not from us. You know, during Katrina, I saw a lot of stories that were told about us, but not from us. So, you know, for me, that was first. And then I think that whenever, you know, HBO and all of these other partners got involved and the film did reach the masses, it was a blessing to be able to take our story and, you know, kind of bring impact, you know, I guess all around the world, you know, because I think that it's important that people know what happened when those levees broke. You know, I think it's important that people, you know that we still need, you know, like, I guess, support and, like, know what happened to us. But also I think that now, especially, you know, today with, like, what's happening with climate, like, all over the world, I mean, you know, the film right now is showing in Brazil and in Puerto Rico because of, like, what happened out there with their storms. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I think that it's cool to see how, like, the film is doing impact all around the world. So I think that that's really kind of like, I guess, like, what I worry about more so, way less about me being known all around the world, but, like, my work being able to impact people all around the world, you know, and, like, not just be known, but actually be able to help somebody in those places.
I agree. Sometimes I feel like one pulls the other in regards to, and I'm going to ask you about this because I know your history of photography is just almost just endless. So, you know, I've been spending a lot of time in Pittsburgh, and the black photographer everyone knows there is Charles Teeny Harris, right? I call him One Shot Harris because he went around with a 4x5, probably Graphics, and 4x5 film costs a lot of money, so I guess he had one shot to get it right. So he perfected it. But it's some names in photography that we know. You know, we know Gordon Parks. A lot of people know Roy DeGarava. Some people don't know, like, a Louis Draper, or, you know, some of these other names like that. And you spend a lot of time with a lot of different photographers, and what I meant is, so, like, how come some people's work becomes more known than others? And I think when we look at a lot of this work, like a Badu or a Marion Porter, it stands up against anyone. And I feel the same way about Harold Baquet's work. So he was known, but what do you think, why do some people and their work is more known than others?
And about Teeny Harris played with the Pittsburgh Crawfords also. Yeah, he played in the Negro Baseball League. Here in New Orleans, we're not a big city, so we don't have big media and publicity like other cities. So that's one reason why. And with Arthur Badu took Harold's baby picture too. And so there's a connection with Harold in Badu, and he admired Badu's work. The tragedy with Badu is that his wife destroyed almost all of his work after his death. So that's a tragedy. So all we have as far as his work is concerned, what we may see in print or what somebody may have in an album or something like that. But that's the problem with New Orleans, and the photographers are not part of the mainstream. It's not the publicity. But a lot of that has changed after the death of George Floyd. These newspapers and companies and media publishers actually seeking, photographers of color. There's this website called diversity.photo, which a guy from New York started to help photographers get work. But let me say this, and I made this statement a few years ago when there was an exhibition at the Ace Hotel called Full Circle. It was the photography of Norman Smith and Eric Waters. And Norman Smith photographed the first Jazz and Heritage Festival when it was in Congo Square. And I made the following statement. It's impossible to look at a photograph and tell anything about the demographics of the photographer. You cannot look at a photograph of the sun and say a male or a female or whatever gender or sex of that person was who took that picture. Same thing of a black person. You can't tell that. what happens when you brought your portfolio to somewhere and they saw who you were, then the opportunities changed. This magazine called PDN, the Photo District News, they ran 2 front-page stories about, one was called Whiteout. And there was this photographer named Baron Claiborne. He photographed for Vibe magazine, and he took the famous portrait of Biggie Smalls sitting in the big chair. He's from Boston, and Bruce Tallerman talked about it too. Bruce Tallerman is a Los Angeles-based photographer, and he photographed. He's still what they call still photographer on the motion picture set. He did one of the Indiana Jones movies as a still photographer, and he talked about it. And then there was another issue about women and the discrimination against women photographers. In that article, it pointed out that a lot of the picture editors and assignment editors for a lot of these magazines were women. But the women photographers were not getting the assignments. So it's ironic that the people who could produce the picture, who had the talent and ability, weren't getting it based on who they were. Because if you brought your portfolio there or you sent it in and then you appeared there, everything changed. There's one photographer in New York who was assistant to some of the biggest name photographers. He told me when he would present his work, they would ask, well, do you have a studio? Do you have an assistant? Do you have a makeup staff? All these questions. Can you shoot tanks? Because we have an Army account. He said, I was in Vietnam, and I photographed tanks there, but he never got to work. See, it's all those things. But like I say, after the death of George Floyd, a lot of that has changed. But you can't, look, one of Harold's, and this is what Harold said, because he appeared here 3 times after Katrina on the campus, and I went to each one of those events. One of his best-selling pictures, he told me, was of David Duke. And he said every time David Duke made some noise, he was making some money. Harold had the idea. Now, he's related to the Baquet family who have the restaurant. There was a restaurant called Cafe Beignet, and it was located on Washington Avenue, right there by that little parking lot that brings you to Rhodes Funeral Parlor. Harold had the idea in the 90s. He came to me, he said, Moo, let's do an exhibition. I said, yeah. So we met over at the restaurant. Excuse me. Harold, me, and Eric Waters to plan the exhibition. So, well, what are you going to have? So he said, well, since he was photographing, he was, the mayor's photographer, he said, well, I can get a place. So he got the place. The place was Perseverance Hall. Now, Perseverance Hall is in Armstrong Park. So if you go in Armstrong Park through the archway, go in and go to your right a little bit by the firehouse, and then turn left. That's Perseverance Hall. Across from it was where WWOZ used to be. So in Perseverance Hall, we had the exhibition. I didn't have any work on the exhibition, but the photographers were Harold, Brian Berto, who was the first black photographer of the New Orleans Times-Picayune, Keith Calhoun, Chandra McCormick, and one other person.
I think it was a lady. Was it a woman? I think.
Yeah. She's deceased now. So we called it Crescent Eyes. Excuse me. So that was in July in the 1990s. So we planned it during the summer when the Society of Photographic Educators would have their conference. It was a small organization at the time. It's big now. And it was at the Jung Hotel on Canal Street. And I had been in correspondence with Deborah Willis before she became Dr. Deborah Willis, got her PhD. And she came down here. Andy Grunberg, I met him, who was the writer on photography in the New York Times. And so we had it at the Perseverance Hall. It was a small thing. The way he got it, because Mickey Bartholomew, the mayor's wife, the first lady of New Orleans, got the place, and it wasn't in good shape. It was okay. But the idea was that we have it there, and that the city was having that exhibition there, that the city would use funds to fix up. They haven't done it yet in all those years. So Deborah Willis and some of it was like 5 or 6 in the evening. It was July, it's hot. So, but I had to leave because my mother had something else to do. And you know, when your mother has something else to do, you doing it. And like the old expression said, the best date a man could have is his mother. So I had to leave. But they came there and later on, and I found out that this is what had happened. Deborah and her group had tried to get a cab from the hotel to bring them there, but the cabs refused. The cabs refused because it said, Armstrong Park, we're not going there because you can get killed there. Now, the city had passed a law, an ordinance, that cabs could not refuse to bring people to Armstrong Park because of that, because tourists had been killed in the park. They walked from the Jung Hotel to Armstrong Park in 90-degree heat to see that exhibition, Crescent Eyes. And that shows you the determination. Now, Deborah came back to New Orleans in preparation for one of her books. And where we met Deborah was at Community Bookstore. The Community Bookstore, the first one was on Ursulines in the Tremie. The second one was on Canal Street next to Henry's Soul Food. It's the block of Canal Street, it was on Broad Street.
Yeah.
Right. The 100 block of North Broad. See, we had the gas station, that block. And they had Henry's Soul Food, and next to it was Community Book Center. That's where Deborah Willis met us. Harold was there, Keith and Chandra were there, and Eric Waters were there, and Dwight Harris was there also. So that was the first time that they met, and my first time meeting Deborah in person, but we had corresponded by mail because she was working for the Schomburg. She was interested in my research, but that was the connection. Now, I don't think Harold's work is in her book, Reflections in Black. I'm not sure about that.
I'm not sure. I know to one of the points you were saying, I'm going to go back and look. I know Seeing Black, what's the one by Dr. Michael Cheers? He was my teacher in graduate school.
Songs of My People.
Songs of My People.
That came about because of the book the Pulitzer Prize winning photographer Brian Lanker did of black women. And that book is great photography. And like I said before, you cannot look at a photograph and tell anything about the demographics of the photographer. I Dream a World. That's the book. That book has sold over 1 million copies in hardcover and in softback. Brian Lanker was a white photographer from either Seattle or Portland, Oregon. On the cover of the book, that's his childhood maid. So the privilege that he had as a child gave him an opportunity not to have time to take care of things in the house that most of us have to do. Yeah. But he did win the Pulitzer Prize, not for that. He's deceased, he died of cancer. But what it did, it upset a lot of photographers, especially this one black female photographer said, well, how come, she made it, so you get some marquee names like Maya Angelou, Mrs. Malcolm X, Betty Shabazz, Angela Davis, Mrs. Martin Luther King, Leontine Price. You get some marquee names, you can have a bestseller anyway. And so that's how the book Songs of My People came about, as a response to that, where black photographers, and Quincy Jones was involved in that also, I believe.
Yeah, I love the book. The only pushback I had, if I was looking too quick, is that New Orleans was covered, but it wasn't covered by any photographers.
Right.
From
okay,
New Orleans.
So this is what happened. Yeah. As I said earlier, New Orleans is...
Could we put a slight pin in that?
Yeah.
because we have about 10, 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
And I do want to ask one more question of these two, and then we have something to open it up.
But New Orleans is stepped on so many ways.
Exactly. That's it.
Real stepped on. Super Bowl takes advantage of in so many ways. Yeah. But anyway, what happened, they brought in the brother from D.C., I believe, who came down here, and Keaton Chandra showed them around, but they didn't know that. He didn't tell them that what he was doing and that the book was going. You see all those kind of things happen?
Yeah.
You get mad for the wrong reason.
No, I know.
You know?
I know, and I think I'm sure we all do this now. Like, anytime I'm with a curator and they're talking outside of New Orleans and they're talking about work of New Orleans, it's always like trying to point a light back to, like, well, have you seen this person's work? Have you done this? There's this show coming up where it's kind of like the same thing about black photojournalists. And I was like, have you seen Harold Baquet's work? And sometimes it comes down to, like you said, with Beidou's work, how easily can you access the archives and the negatives? But one thing I want to ask you two is, what's the state, when we hear from their generation, Eric Waters and they all like close, they like hang out. So I like to know, I know you hang out with other photographers too. Just what's your state, in your opinion, what's the state of the photographic community in New Orleans now? Oh, well, you know, hey, you closest to me. If you want,
What's the state of it?
yeah. Well, what do you think of what's happening with photographers now?
I mean, look. I mean, I caught, you know. I mean, social media changed everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think that whenever we talk about, you know, I guess access and also exposure, I think that, you know, I'm noticing now, and I taught, you know, for a few years, I taught digital media, and, you know, I would tell them, because, you know, many questions that, so I took a photography and a film class when I was in high school, but no one took it seriously, not even the school, not even like the teacher. He was just teaching it, you know. It was just like an elective, and people would just come to class and just, you know, do everything else but learn, you know, photography. I was really interested in it though. But in high school, I wasn't too confident because of the climate of, you know, the classroom. I wasn't too confident that I was going to be able to go out and be a professional in that, you know. I mean, like, whenever I told my dad that I wanted to be a filmmaker, he literally sat down and looked me in my face and said, "Bro, go get a trade." Like, you tripping? like, are you okay? You know, but like, I think that whenever I taught high school, and especially because it was parallel with me making Katrina babies and with me going out to the second lines, and, you know, I was telling you earlier, when I first saw you at Jazz Fest, you know, like seeing a black man at Jazz Fest shooting, and, you know, you had all access to, like, you were, you wasn't just, you know, like trying to like squeeze them, but like you had all access and
on
like
stage and everything.
Yeah, and, you know, I remember I stopped him and I just asked him, because, you know, that was when, you know, I was still learning how to network. I was like, "Yo, you got a card?" You know, like, "You got a card?" He looked at me as like, "Yeah," and he said, "Yeah, take it, call me," you know, but I think that it was when I went out, like, to these different events and I saw black image makers, like photographers, filmmakers, everything, along with social media happening, and, you know, just like all of these different events that called for, you know, I mean, I think it's just like a shift in image making completely, not just with black people doing it, like, completely. It's just changing. The landscape is changing. I think social media has a big role in that. And I was just gonna say, for a circle, like, whenever I taught high school and whenever I taught, like, my kids, I felt confident in telling them, no, you can go out and be a filmmaker. You can go out and be a photographer. And I had some of those fathers that would come to my class and, you know, kind of threaten me a little bit. It's like, "Yo, like, you're telling my child to go and do this. Are you positive that, you know," and first of all, it's not about that. It's about passion to me. It's like, you know, I know so many people that follow their parents' advice about what they should do, and it's all out of love. Like they just want you to be happy and succeed. But if you're not happy, in like what you're doing, I always put that first. But I do think that there's just like these different pathways and there's these different platforms and like ways to be a successful, photographer right now. So when you ask me like, what is the current state of it? I think that I just see a lot of hungry young photographers out there that have seen our work, that has seen Mr. Harold, Baquet's work, and Polo and Mr. Eric Waters and all of these other people, that are just making things. And now with social media, and because the culture is where it is, everybody wants to be a part of that documentation. I also think that Hurricane Katrina played a big role in that, no matter if we know it or not. But I think that losing everything and losing, our archives made like a lot of people want to go back and, just like recreate those memories and those moments. So yeah.
I agree, and just a little personal privilege. I just want to give Shayna Griffin her flowers and the whole Scene Black with you, Shayna, and Eric Waters. So it was an exhibit, and it's a book published by Press that's out now. And it's just probably almost every living photographer, black photographer who's working, and some who are our ancestors now. But I think we have time for some questions from the audience. Okay, we do. Great. Y'all have to ask questions or you fail. No, I'm just playing. I'm not.
Questions. All right. I saw Virginia's hand first.
It was mentioned that, like New Orleans is pretty small and it's stepped on a lot. So I have to ask, what kept you here? What kept you here instead of going to a bigger city like New York, where like you probably get more action?
I did live in Los Angeles from 1974 to 1978. Worked out there at the Jet Propulsion Lab. Jet Propulsion Lab, part of NASA. Jet Propulsion Lab does deep space exploration, unmanned deep space exploration. I was there when we landed on Mars for the very first time. But I came back home, and I'd still be out there, if it weren't for my family.
I mean, I lived in New York from 2020 up until 3 weeks ago. I just moved back, but I didn't leave because of that reason. I didn't leave for any negative reasons or like New Orleans being stepped on, although those things are true, but that didn't make me leave. I just always wanted to live in New York. So I just moved out there for a few years, and then I got bored. It's just like, once you're from New Orleans, it's kind of hard, at least now, like for me. But, it's funny. I asked this question to one of my students the other day, one of my former students, and because when I was growing up, it was a big thing that everybody wanted to leave New Orleans. And like, I want to go live somewhere else. And I asked him, he had just turned 22, and I was like, yo, does your generation like want to leave New Orleans and like move away from New Orleans? Like, do y'all feel like a need to leave? And he was like, no, bro. He was like, now you can be wherever you want to be, because of social media. And also it kind of just markets you different and brands you different when you're in and from New Orleans. So I don't know. I still have hope for New Orleans. Like, there's a lot of things that are changing, and it's not at the pace that I want. But I think that there are like a lot of things happening, especially in this new generation. So that's why I'm here. And yeah.
I was gonna leave once I graduated from Xavier, but my career kept me here. I had a career in radio, so I did radio for a few years. But sometimes I think about it, but I'm very big on energy and your path, and I feel like every step of the way it leads me to stay here in New Orleans. I don't know if I go somewhere else where I'm gonna hang out at on Sundays. I don't believe they have a second line. So, so it's like, I really enjoy being in New Orleans. I enjoy capturing the people of New Orleans. And I just feel like a lot of people say that New Orleans is stepped on or whatever, but what's for you is for you. So I feel like I've had a whole lot of opportunities. One of my big opportunities with Cosimo, he wanted me to be, I did behind the scenes shooting for him for New York Times, and they ended up publishing my image, and I wasn't even I'm just getting behind the scenes. Yes. So it's like the opportunities, I feel like they'll come your way if it's meant for you. If you look at E. Buckles and this documentary on HBO, like, you were here when it happened.
I always tell people, because like people always got it confused, because I moved to New York when I was editing Katrina Babies. I don't know why I just thought that was fly. Oh, I'm gonna go edit in New York. Yeah. But also
that's fire though.
No, but also my editor was in New York, so I wanted to be in the same time zone as her, which it was just some excuse that I gave HBO to move me out there. But oh, this is being recorded. But. Oops. But yeah, like I always tell people, I what up, Trinity? Hey, another great photographer and like image maker has just entered the building. Trinity 504 Degrees. Shout out to that. That like that legend in the making. Like y'all definitely check out his work, because it's like, I mean, it's great. It's brilliant. But I always say, like, I didn't leave New Orleans and make it, like, I made it down here, and like I'm proud of that. I'm proud because like so many people, it's just like, oh, like you gotta leave New Orleans to make it. No, you don't. It's like maybe some people, but again, everybody's road is different, everybody's story is different. I made my Katrina Babies deal down here in the Ninth Ward. You know what I'm saying? So yeah.
And if I could say one thing, I think one thing that I have started to do is to travel more. And so I'm starting to notice like different things that I'm seeing. Like when I went to Bali, they have street parades, and it reminds me so much of a second line. So for me, it's me incorporating that into my work, showing the comparison in different places. When I went to New York and went to Brooklyn and went to the block parties, it looks like the second line without the brass bands. So yeah.
Hi. How do you go about having conversations with the people you're photographing to better those relationships and later impact the images you're taking?
That can be pretty hard sometimes. Robert Capa made the statement, if your photographs are not good enough, if you're not close enough. But that, people may think that means physically close, so sometimes you have to be emotionally close or part of the subject that you photograph. But as I said before, you can't look at a photograph and tell anything about the demographics of the photographer who took the picture. And when you are viewing the photograph, do you realize that you are the photographer also? Now, with the cell phone, everybody is a photographer. And we have finally made the accomplishment that a lot of the industrialists, captains of industry, Henry Ford wanted everybody have a car, be able to drive. George Eastman, in the beginning, he had the Kodak #2, which was loaded with film. You took the pictures, very simple point and shoot camera, and sent the whole camera back with the film, and they sent you another one back with, some more film. But not everybody was able to afford that. But since the cell phone is in everybody's hands, everybody's a photographer. So what makes one photographer better or lesser? I don't know. It's not really the photographer, it's the person who's looking at the picture who makes the photograph now.
Hi, so I was, whenever I was looking through the exhibit, I was particularly interested in the photo titled "For Pretty Pretty from Way Uptown."
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask 2 questions about it. What's the story behind the photo? And also, what effect did you want to achieve by using a central composition?
Yeah, so you're talking about Queen Taj, and I gotta give Queen Taj her flowers. She just had like a crazy run with Super Bowl. Back in July, I got the honor to shoot her for the cover of Essence magazine as well. And that's what that photo was actually for. It was for Essence. Well, actually, we didn't shoot. So I shot a bunch of photos, and they chose that one to be on the cover. We didn't know which ones it would be. But the story that I have with her is that it's funny. I got introduced to the Black Mexican Indians by way of my grandmother, Edna Rubin, and she was a huge fan, you know, just of like the Golden Eagles. They would pass in front of her door. They would come and see her. And, you know, many tribes still do this, you know, where, like, they go and see the elders and, you know, like, just give them, like, you know, like, just give them a show in front of their door because maybe, like, they're not going to walk the parade or, like, you know, like, going to the park at Super Sunday or whatever. So they used to always, you know, go and see my grandmother. And our families are really, really close, and we didn't even know it. So I would always film her because, you know, she was just always polarizing to me because, like, she was so young. And she was just so young but really, really present. So when I thought of, like, whenever I got the assignment to, you know, shoot the Essence covers, I thought about people that I thought, you know, I guess, like, deserve, like, the spotlight from my generation. So I just, you know, put it on her. And it just felt like just really full circle for my grandmother. What was your second question?
What effect did you want to achieve by using a central composition for the photo?
Yeah, so we shot on medium. So that specific photo, we shot that on medium format. And honestly, whenever we decided to shoot on film, because I had to convince Essence, you know, to do that. They
wanted digital.
They get real nervous.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
well, almost everybody gets nervous. Not even just Essence, but you know, people get real nervous when they can't see it on set. You know, it's like whenever, like, you know, so like right now, I'm shooting an assignment, and I want to shoot film again. You know, and it's for a cover. And I want to shoot film again, but, you know, right now I'm workshopping with my team about, okay, how can we just give them the confidence that they're going to leave the set and feel like they have their cover, you know? So it's always hard, but, you know, I just wanted to shoot film. I don't know, it's just something about film to me that just, like, gives it, like, that texture and, like emotional element that, like, I like, you know? I shoot real up-close portraits, and I just think that it does something to the skin that, like, I just really, really love. But most of the covers that I did for that series of Essence, some were on film and some were on digital because I had to, you know, kind of play the game. Yeah.
More question there.
While y'all figuring out the next question, hello to Ronald Green, up in the back.
Yeah, Ronald Green was one of the photographers at the very first Jazz and Heritage Festival, and I see Merlin Summers right up front. That was Harold's roommate at the corner of St. Peter and Royal Street. And he's a photographer also. Until Harold met Sharon, right?
Hi, thank you all for sharing and for the work you're doing. I was listening a lot about you know, people from a place being able to tell the story of their place, and that's so incredible. But my question really comes down to, you know, a lot of the subject matter that you guys are photographing, we talked a lot about inside and outside of New Orleans. It's really mythical outside of New Orleans. I live here now, but coming from from outside and having years of studying and starting to understand, I was just curious, like, where does your art, like, sort of the spiritual and technical meet? Because there's a lot of spirituality coming out through, obviously, the acts that happen in New Orleans, but you see it in your photography. And just if you could share a little bit about that.
Since I went to Rochester Institute of Technology, a lot of technology, I think about, plays a big role in my selection of different things like that. Like all the pictures in the exhibition were shot on film, and that is my preference when I'm shooting for myself. But I'm practical that, you know, for the immediacy, right now at Jazz Fest. I couldn't shoot that on film, no way. We have to have that. A lot of it gets on social media, not mine right now, almost immediately, and it's just everybody's accustomed to that. Unless you want to, and you have enough clout to say it's film, and we do have in the motion picture industry a lot of people only, I think, have made a commitment to only shoot the movies on film, right? So, but once again, like I quoted Robert Capra about being close. Your photographs are not good enough if you aren't close enough. Once again, that's close to the subject. Now, what somebody else, an outsider can bring is seeing something that the person who is an insider, the person who's insider can take a lot of things for granted and not see what the outsider sees. So the outsider can see something that I might take for granted, just pass every day normal and say, well, I'm going to see that every day, all the time, and think that it's always going to be there. But the outsider, the person not part of it, can see it differently and bring a different eye to the subject matter.
I agree. I'll jump in real quick. I think it's a perfect combination of like a triad. That's too much music. Well, a triangle. And you have what the person is exuding at that moment, and the spirituality or the feeling that you get from them, and then you have your ability to see it, to pre-visualize it, but then the technique comes in when you can make it, when you can get it. Like they talk about like the peak moment. I think that's very important. So that's why having technique matters, where you can execute what you see, and you don't, because sometimes most moments only happen once and it doesn't come again. Like a millisecond before, a millisecond after could totally change the picture. So it's important to be able to get it at that moment.
Can I add to that real quick? Because that's a great question. And honestly, spirit is what called me to the craft and, like to filmmaking. Because I didn't really have the access to the tools and to the information and to, all of the information that I felt that I needed to really master technique. But what I did have, and I didn't know it at the time, because like other people had to tell me, was the spirit and like the soul. It's like even if my stuff was out of focus, I had a certain soul and like a certain spirit to how I was filming it. Like the access that I felt comfortable with. So that was all that I had. It wasn't until, and I always say this, and I still struggle with this, it was when I started learning all of the technique, and I'm grateful for it. And, I'm very happy that, like, I've studied my craft. You asked me earlier about shooting on film. That's another reason that I shoot on film is, like, because, like, I feel like I don't want to be, like, one of the photographers that are only shooting digital and on the phone. I want to learn the craft, But also I think that whenever I did go to school and, like, sometimes I feel like the more that I learn, it kind of sometimes challenges, like, the spirit. And, just like those natural things that you have, like right now, like, I work in the ad space and, like once upon a time, like I called myself only taking work that like I felt was calling my spirit. And it's hard to do that in the ad space, like how is Coca-Cola going to call your spirit? You know what I'm saying? Like, nah, it be calling my mama spirit. She be wanting that crazy. Like, but, I think that I've been trying to figure out the balance, because like most of my work I do think is spiritual, but I think that like the, more access that we get and like the more assignments that we get, yeah, like you can be selective, but I guess right now I'm trying to find a balance. Like, do I only take work that calls my spirit, that like feels spiritual, that I feel called to? Because I pass up on like a lot of money because of that, because I'm like, oh, like I don't feel like that's calling my spirit,
Let me just comment on one more thing about the pictures that I have there of K-Doe, that was taken during the second line. The coon meat photograph, that was taken during the second line. The little boys, do I have the kids on the skateboard? Okay, that was taken during the parade. None of those pictures show the parade or the second line itself. So that's what, just don't whatever you photograph, it's just not that subject matter. It's things around it also that play an important role. Let me just say this before we close about Harold Baquet. Harold was given just a few days or weeks to live when he was diagnosed with cancer. He extended that into years. He put his fight on Facebook wearing the MD Anderson. He still scuba dived. He used to get his equipment from a place called the Dive Shop on Haines Boulevard. It's not Haines Boulevard. There's no S. It's Haines Boulevard. He gave 3 presentations after Katrina here at Loyola University. I attended each one. And one of them was in celebration of 100 years of Loyola University, founded by the Jesuits. Now, being a graduate of St. Augustine, those are the Josephites. Harold said the Josephites are the Jesuits without the money. In that presentation, in present there was Crescent. Crescent was Ray Crescent's brother. Ray Crescent was charged of KNB camera on Canal Street, later on Dauphine Street. Crescent was in his 90s, I believe, when he passed away. Both of them were in their 90s when they each passed away. But anyway, in that presentation of 100 years of this institution, it was not just his photographs, but also archival photographs. Harold showed a picture of a Jesuit priest at his desk here at Loyola. On one side of the desk was the crucifix, Jesus Christ on the cross. On the other side of the desk was the Confederate flag. At one time, I wouldn't be able to be a student at this university. So a lot has changed, and it changed during his lifetime. That's all I want to say about Harold Baquet.
Thank y'all for coming out. We really appreciate it, and I hope everyone will see the exhibit for the first time and see it again for several more times. Thanks, Loyola, for this. Thanks, Doctor. Thanks, everybody. Dr. Heidel, thank you. Marks, I don't know if you got a PhD too, but I know you got all the skills. Thank y'all for coming out.
It's St. Joseph night. Everybody get out there on that street and see that culture.